Okay, well, we're back here with Drea Burbank from the Colombian Amazon and Savimbo, this innovative company movement concept thing that has, I think, 55 native communities behind it and a whole lot more around the world. And this is a very important day because you're launching a huge campaign about the rights of nature for the UN. So what's going on today? Why is today so important?
Today is about rights of nature. Because we got insider access to the emerging biodiversity market, one of the topics on the table internationally was whether or not people were going to allow biodiversity offsetting. So they would kill an animal in one location and then they would pay a fee or a fine and say, yeah, we're good. And we really wanted to sell biodiversity credits, which is like biodiversity action on the ground. People could get paid for things they were already doing in terms of conserving rare animals. But we didn't want to see this offsetting thing get put into place. And so we decided to fight it from a policy level. And the obvious tool was rights of nature law, which is already being put into effect in a lot of countries. So it was serendipitous timing. It was the leader's idea. When they got into their independent access and their own negotiations and started writing rules for the market, they said, this is the best tool we've got. And so we have 99 leaders, 25 countries, 55 nations have gone behind it. A lot of them have put their name on a petition. We built an independent website that doesn't have a brand because we decided the planet isn't about a brand. It's not about Savimbo as a for-profit or our partners like Melabes who are nonprofits. It's about getting the laws that we need for humans to respect nature better.
I'm really glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
We were having a conversation internally here about branding, branding environmental action and community action. And, that's about people. That's
Yeah.
not about a corporate logo.
Yeah. We negotiated that early on. There is a lot of people that are really opposed to for-profit action, even if it's Indigenous led. And we said, can we just take that debate off the table and align on the purpose? So the website is Rights of Nature now. It's just about the action that we want. There's for-profit social enterprises like us, nonprofits on there. But the only way you can put your logo on there is if you take some action.
Right. And so you have this whole media campaign going. So there's a Twitter platform, there's a Facebook platform, there's a YouTube video being premiered tonight,
Yes.
which I've seen, thankfully, because we got early press access. And thank you for that. And it's really excellent. It's really cool. It's got a great look and a great vibe, and I think it's going to be very successful. And then the press release, my goodness, that was really dynamic and really strong. So you did 3 drafts of that?
Yeah, we did 3 drafts because we wanted to be very clear on what we were asking for and who we were asking for. Because as much as we're involved with Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities, we also work for small farmers, and all of our products are designed to help them as well do better climate action. And then there's a huge community of people that are in the corporate world that need to control corporate action. And we want them to align with us. We need people who are on the other side of the fence or outside of the 6% of the population to look at it and say, hey, yeah, you know what? I totally agree. I want my children to live on a verdant planet too. So we rewrote it 3 times.
Well, it really is perfect. And, having seen a lot of environmental initiatives and nonprofit initiatives, I mean, what's really striking to me is the lack of the sponsorship and branding and the reaffirmation of people the lead agency. You know, they have the agency, they're the lead. So I just want to compliment you once again on that. So we have a number of listeners out there. What would you like them to do?
Well, there's basically 3 levels of action. They can sign a petition, which is amazing. It just puts names on paper and says this is getting serious. The next level of action is they can get involved locally. So local laws are really powerful. If listeners belong to Indigenous nations, they are sovereign territory. And if they get involved in drafting this legislation and implement it on their territory, it creates massive legal network of sovereign territories that have adopted rights of nature. And then it can begin being enforced outside of their territory. So that's one of the core structural things that we're doing. The last thing is, I think if anybody is involved with corporate policy or law or anything specialized, they should get involved now in helping us strategically target, because we need 196 nations in the UN to ratify it. So it's going to take a network of people that are coordinated and acting together.
So the title of the press release, and let me see if I can get this right. Indigenous nations demand rights for nature. Is that correct?
Indigenous leaders, because nations
yes.
take a little bit longer to get behind stuff. This was a really interesting movement. A lot of people have asked me, well, where did these guys come from? Why haven't we heard of them before? Most of the leaders that we work with and know are cultural leaders. They're spiritual leaders. They are not politically active. They don't normally put their face on camera. They might be known within their communities as leaders from the heart. They're leaders that other Indigenous people look up to and listen to because they're wise. They aligned around this because they are facing really extreme threats. A lot of them are concerned because their river is going down for the first time in their life, you know, or they're seeing the jungle fall all around them. One of our groups they lost 75% of their land in the last 5 years, just clear cutting the forest, and they lost the title to the land. Some of our groups lost about 2 million hectares in total during COP28. So they have decided that the only way to really beat this is to align and strategically align with other leaders that are like-minded around the world. And so this is a unique movement, I would say. This is not a voice that you typically hear, definitely not on camera.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking around the Western United States, we have a lot of this kind of thing going on. You mentioned the logging kind of out of control, and you know, the harvesting of the biomass materials, including trees and everything else in the forest. And, you know, here we've had locations like Thacker Pass in Nevada, which have been the site for, you know, gigantic lithium mining activities on essentially relatively pristine sage land with endangered or protected species like the sage grouse and others, and there doesn't seem to be a strong enough mechanism to stop these projects or to revise policies. Although I did notice the Biden administration has changed the language around their response and management of the lands in the last couple of days, which I thought was very interesting. It seemed to strengthen Indigenous cultural recognition and protection, but you know, we don't know what's going to happen in practice.
Yeah, there's robust evidence that when Indigenous groups manage forests, they perform better. There's an amazing study done in, I don't know if it was Nepal or Tibet, of like 20 to 30 years of forest management and how much better the forest performed when the Indigenous groups were managing it. I would also say this is an old trauma. You know, if you read Chief Joseph, his statements, this is not a new opinion about respecting nature. The difference is, if you read the Human Rights Code, you know, when they finally abolished slavery and they put human rights into international law, the code really reads, to me, when I read it, it reads like a lesson learned. Like, as a human species, we finally understand how to treat our brothers. After centuries of war and bloodshed, we finally see the right way to handle this. And we wrote down this lesson that we have learned. And so the leaders are saying right now that they feel like climate change has finally gotten through to enough people that people are willing to learn this lesson as a species, as a planet. and not just as an individual. And so the Human Rights Code came out of World War II and the atrocities of World War II. And what they're saying is the energy of planetary collapse, we've crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, leads to an opportunity to learn a global lesson. And so what they did on their videos, if you watch them, is they're teaching the lesson. Very simple words and tic-tac speed and videos and social media. These are new techniques. They're teaching the lesson actively. Like, you guys are finally ready to learn, and we're here to teach, and we're still here to teach.
Yeah, it felt really good. I mean, it felt like the messages were from the heart and very sincere and innovative. The way people said things, they said them in their own words and quite colorfully and wonderfully. It seems like we're almost speaking 2 different languages between the cultures.
Well, white, like I always tell the guys I work with, white culture always looks for a central decision maker. They look for a hierarchy and the person at the top of the hierarchy, and then they fight their way to the top and they get that person and they get their decision. That's not how Indigenous peoples make decisions. And so if you're like a white corporate, you're always looking for that one person who's going to sign. And that's really not how it's done. I've been watching it a lot, and to me, it's really interesting because everybody has such a diverse and their own unique opinion, and yet somehow most of the groups seem to be able to come up with a collective opinion at the same time, something they all agree on by consensus. And so that process to me is really interesting. It's like how we maintain autonomy and individual personhood, and yet find an alignment and some kind of cohesion.
Well, and I know that just seems to happen in Indigenous communities. And it's kind of a magical mystery thing that, wow, how did that happen? How did everybody come together in such a way? I mean, it's spontaneous and powerful.
It's this thing that everybody calls tribe, and like a lot of trendy people in Silicon Valley are trying to like create tribes. But the lived experience of it for me is so much more subtle. It's this feeling of belonging, and that you're going to be okay, and that your shadow side and your sun side are both known, but you're still a unique individual, and yet somehow you can do things collectively. I don't know. For me, it's very healing.
Mm-hmm. So again, the actions for our listeners. So for the Indigenous communities, take a listen, join in, connect. For the non-Indigenous communities, sign the petition. What else am I missing?
Like, follow, share. Can't beat a like, follow, share. We need people to help amplify this voice. The Indigenous leaders are 6% of the population and even smaller. And what they're teaching is really valuable. We required them to, when we vetted the leaders and the videos in advance, we said that we wanted people who truly had the embodied right to speak for nature. And that sounds like a strange request, but for us, it was really important that came through on the video, that they had earned the right in their own body to be a voice for something that doesn't have a voice. And so the like, follow, share to amplify that voice, because it's really precious. Signing the petition. Businesses can join if they do something. So by do something, we mean helping to amplify the voice in one way or the other, or working for rights law, amplifying current campaigns in your territory. Legal groups that are already engaged in rights of nature are 100% willing and invited and ready and welcome to join. And then we would like people who have structural power in society to join the co-editing group for the declaration. It's a 6-month drafting process. And at the end, we're going to announce it at COP16 in Colombia.
Now we're getting down to nuts and bolts. So COP in Colombia. So that process we've gone over in previous broadcasts, at least as far as COP28.
Yeah.
And we hadn't really discussed. Would you say that there's a lot of compromise there as well to fight against?
We didn't normally go to a conference because I'm against conferences in general. But this one, the leader said, we are going and we're going in force, and we want to go and say what we want to say. And what they wanted to say was rights of nature. So the difference, I think, between this one and other ones is that we're announcing something that's already decided.
Mm-hmm. So that's what you meant by going on offense. I mean, it sounds like the soccer team has taken the field down in Colombia, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows how to play the game. It's just the question of, do you want to sit back and struggle and respond or react, or do you want to take the lead? And this is really a kind of a new thing, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's not just Colombia. We from day one, we started talking to people in Africa, Asia, Australia, the Maori. They sent a video the other day. North America. We're very strongly interested in taking cohesive action that crosses the pond, and that's complementary.
So I'm going to ask you this about three times. So what is the URL for the website that listeners should go to learn more and, look around, see what's
Rights
going on?
rightsofnaturenow.com. And the
Okay,
reason
that's
we put
easy.
the now in there is I don't think anything happens anytime but now. So it's rights of
Hmm.
nature now.
Now is now. We have now. We don't have tomorrow. We don't have yesterday.
Yeah, we have now.
Now.
Yeah. And I've heard way too much. I've heard way too much in the last 2 years working in climate later. And I don't think there
Oh.
is a later. There is no later. There's only now. So you're either doing something now or you're not doing anything at all.
Mm-hmm. And are you accepting donations?
Yes, we are. And we made an early decision. And I love this decision. All donations go directly to Indigenous leaders. They're evenly distributed between the communities according to urgency and need by the leaders themselves. So we're not going to see fancy branding. You're not going to see fancy social media channels or a fancy website, because that's where the money's going. The way we put it is, if you were nature, who would you pay?
Mm-hmm. So nature is the client.
And is paying the people that are doing the most for it.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't say he. We've gone a lot over gender on nature. And we decided to go, because a lot of people are Mother Nature and nature's a woman, but not all cultures are universal in that. So we decided to use the word nature instead, because a lot of people, they'll assign the gender that is appropriate to him, her. When I hear nature, I think Mother Nature, but other people might
Mm-hmm.
hear it and think something different.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is really exciting. So then you find out, about the video launch. We find out about the video launch later tonight, 9 o'clock
Yeah,
Eastern Standard Time. The video is available online,
true.
and that's really worth a look. And then you have a ceremony to celebrate this activity and development and life in general, and you bring everybody together. So that's a big day. Are you
Yep.
going to sing and dance all night?
I don't know. You never really know what you're going to do in ceremony. You'd like to think that you'll, be super sedate and well behaved, but sometimes you end up howling at the moon, and that's okay too. For me, ceremony is a good place to get a break. So it's my reward. We worked really hard on this campaign for a couple of months, and it's my way to celebrate.
Well, congratulations to everyone. And we have a second topic that we wanted to discuss, and it has to do with forest medicinal practices in treating trauma, which is exceptionally widespread here in the United States. I made the comment to you that my feeling is that we live in a tremendously fear-based society. And so engaging people is sometimes difficult. And also healing, the adoption of healing practices by people is not necessarily a forefront, when we have so many other distractions in the United States. So can you describe a little bit about the trauma memory release process from a healing perspective, or let's say a physician's perspective, if you want to use that word, and if you can compare it in some ways to what we do in a doctor's office in the United States.
Yeah. So for me, this is a perspective that came from a very long journey. I had a really tough childhood, and I had a lot of trauma. And initially I covered it up with, very active things. So I was a firefighter, high adrenaline junkie, traveling around the world, being super cool. And in my 20s, it just hit me like a freight train. I think I'd finally gotten this degree of life stability to where it finally could process it. And sometimes that happens that when you don't really take it in when it's happening, but when you get into a safe place, then the body starts to heal. So all that stuff comes up to clear. And I went through a period of about 10 years of just intense depression. And I was a smart kid and I was pre-med, so I did a lot of reading. I probably read thousands of books in psychology, behavioral health, antidepressants, you name it. And I tried all the different medications. And in medical school, I was still, really invested in this kind of like mind-body split and medicine to treat depression. And I started to realize as I was training in medicine in my 4 years of medical training, how little we really knew about depression and how unsuccessful we were at treating it. Depression and trauma just completely poorly handled. And we couldn't distinguish between trauma and grief, and everything was getting, covered up with these different kinds of medications. And at the end of my 4 years of medical training, I had a spiritual awakening, and it was very unanticipated. I was an atheist scientist, and I didn't know what was happening at first. But what happened was my trauma just started to heal, like truly heal. And I didn't experience depression again ever in my life. I had brief periods of low mood, but I didn't have depression like that. And I went on a really long journey after that, probably 10, 15 years of like understanding what healing was. Because until then, I've been really invested in the concept of damage and disease. And after that, after the awakening, I was really invested in the concept of healing. Like, what does a fully healed mind even look like? What is sanity really? And so my perspective comes from, I wouldn't say, this sounds so asinine, I just don't believe that trauma is necessary, and certainly not permanent trauma. And I truly believe that it can be healed, like permanently healed.
Well, I think Fernando said the initial trauma is the birth, right? But then we pick up all these other things, like you were mentioning, youth trauma, childhood trauma, adult acquired trauma. There's a whole bunch of categories.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing because it's tough out here, in Southern California, in the society we've created, and in the United States. As a human being, you're not obligated to be traumatized for the rest of your life.
No, and I also think you're meant to, so the Chinese, I started studying a lot of different medical disciplines. Like outside of Western medicine, I studied like Ayurvedic medicine, shamanic healing, traditional Chinese medicine. I really started looking outside the box. The Chinese have a concept that trauma is something called Shen. In other words, you acquire this very painful thing. And then if you transmute it, it becomes this thing called Jing, which is life experience or wisdom. And so trauma in that perception is homework. It's just like vegetables that you got to eat. It's something that you're supposed to go through and work through and metabolize and come out the other side wiser. And I feel like a lot of us, we get our trauma, and I don't think anybody's never not had trauma. Some of us have had it worse than others for sure. But we get our trauma and we don't take that perspective. It's like, okay, I've got my trauma and I'm permanently damaged for the rest of my life, and anything that I do is excusable. I certainly had that mentality. And then when I realized that wasn't how it worked, like I was responsible to sort through my trauma and make something out of it, that's when I started to get better.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the term that's used for the first type of trauma that we mentioned is adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, and now when I'm treating trauma, because I seem to work with it a lot lately, I definitely separate between early childhood and post-childhood. And the reason is before about age 5, anything that happens to you goes into your mind unquestioned. It just is believed. And so it ends up in the subconscious in many cases, and it can be very influential later on in adulthood. If something happens in adulthood, you're at least questioning it while it's occurring, usually, unless it's like, like Stockholm syndrome or something, when you've been a little bit programmed. But most people haven't had that severe of a trauma, so most people are going to be questioning it, even if it's really painful. But a child will just accept it as is, and they won't go back to it. So trauma has a lot of interesting pathologies, or I shouldn't say pathologies. Trauma has a lot of interesting mechanisms that people don't really think about. It's like wagon ruts in the brain. Something bad happens, and you fall into the wagon rut, and you go back to the time when the trauma happened. And for a while, you're acting out of that age. So people who have early childhood trauma will oftentimes revert back to the age of 2 or 3 and start behaving like a very young child, but they won't even be aware of it because that's when the trauma went back to.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Los Angeles post World War II, beginning in the 1950s, if I'm permitted to date myself that old. But it was very militarized. We had, the Navy down in Long Beach. We had returning GIs, starting families, moving forward. The energy was very patriarchal, very militarized, very, kind of strict and controlled according to a hierarchical structure. Like it was not easy for kids to be kids. There's a phrase, children are to be seen and not heard. There's a lot of that. And now we don't raise children that way. So in my own experience, and this might be interesting to the listeners, just to sort of cop to it, that we got a ton of trauma. And it came to me later exactly how that manifested and how I felt about it. And the more you try to cover it up, the more uneasy you are, and it causes anxiety and everything else. And you don't get through life without it compiling and building up, essentially, if you don't do the homework. Is that a fair assessment?
It totally is. And I ended up with this algorithm for clearing trauma, and I'll tell it to you, and you guys make of it what you will. But when the trauma happens, you're usually in not a safe place. And your body is designed to take it, shut it into a box, and get yourself out of the bad situation. So this is just like an extreme trauma, like, somebody shoots somebody in front of you. You are not going to deal with it or process it then. You're going to put it in a box, put it in the back of your head, and get out of the situation. And then later, when you're feeling safe and you're relaxing, all of a sudden that situation is going to come up, because now is the time when you have the time and space to clear, to take care of it. And so when it comes up, you immediately go back to the physiological response of that happening in front of you. So your body will start, you'll be hyperventilating. Something will trigger it. Something will be similar to the original situation. And then the box gets opened. And then you're going back into the physical response that you had at the time. And the way to clear it, this sounds so simple, and it is really tough to do. But if you get the algorithm right, you can clear just about anything. It's like a super simple algorithm, like 10 years of therapy. I'm just going to give you like several $1,000s of the therapy for free. So basically, you're now in a safe place and the trauma's come up to clear. So you're having the physiological and emotional response of the original trauma. And the way to clear it is to simply allow yourself to feel all of that, like in all of its intense glory. And at the same time, hold in your head that you are now safe. You're now in a new situation. And most people tend to loop back through their traumas and repeat it again and again, because they can't do both at once. They go back to the space and then they try and cover it up, drugs, alcohol, whatever, but they don't hold in their head that I'm in a new situation, which is why it's coming up to clear. So they're not in the old situation, even though it seemed like it, which is why it triggered. They're in the new situation, and they're probably in a safer place, and then they feel it, and then they have the new one, and it shorts it out. And if they want to, they can do something to clear it in the body. And I usually recommend one of 3 things: either tapping the chest here, like on the collarbone, the breastbone. You can rock. Sometimes it helps if you put like a weighted blanket or something, like a firm blanket around yourself, and you can curl in, and rocking and tapping the forehead will also work. So that just gets it out of the body, and it shorts it out, and it allows you to process it. And after that, you don't have the physiological response. You might still have some mental sorting out to do, but you won't have the physical reaction.
So it seems like we're doing a lot of unpacking in the middle of your celebration today and your announcement, and the beginning of the process of creating a rights of nature movement that's powerful at the upcoming COP.
We want to do something new and fresh. I don't care about a conference and impressing people anymore. So if we're going to go, then we're going to show something. And that's what I want to show. If I'm going to connect all these different elements, I can 100% say that at a certain point in my life, I just decided I was no longer going to worship death. And I was only going to work for life. I'm not one of those people who thinks we're going to live forever. I have no problem with the sunrise and sunset of the human existence. But at the same time, I'm not interested in death. I'm not interested in pathology. I'm not interested in disease anymore. I'm really interested in this explosion of life and color and creation that is the people that I work with and the things that we do together, and the future that I see for our species and my friends' children. I don't have any of my own, but at some point you got to hang your flag.